Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Lunchtime with Anna. It's hard to believe we're already in November. Like, the year's almost over. What did you accomplish this year? What did you accomplish this year? Announcements, quick announcements. If you guys haven't caught the Black Adam movie, check it out. I come out in it. Let me know if you spot me on it. I did come out in Black Adam. The next thing is I will be doing a modeling shoot within the next 2 weeks. It might be a little bit longer photo shoot. So I'm pretty excited about that. I'll give you guys details as soon as they allow me to. But enough about these little announcements. I have a fellow activist who we met online and through other activists, and we were just having a conversation of how it was for them while they were in the Department of Corrections for the state of Georgia. So they used to be incarcerated, and their story is just like, wow. And then any activist has my respect because it takes a lot to do what we do. See, are you there?
Hi, Anna. Yeah, I am here.
Thank you for coming. Thank you so much for taking time to be here on my platform because I know you have a pretty tight, busy schedule. So thank you, and I appreciate you taking time to come here.
No, Anna, the pleasure is all mine. I'm super grateful to be here. This is a wonderful opportunity. And of course, you and I have been slowly developing our friendship. So I've really looked forward to this, and it's an incredible chance. And I'm just super grateful to be here with you today.
Oh, thank you. And same here. So, see?
Yes.
Tell us. First, let's start with a little background, or as little or as much as you'd like to say, and then we'll go on to talk about what you've done, what you've accomplished, what you want to do, so forth, so on. And if I find questions fit throughout the interview, I'll ask you the questions.
Sure.
So you can answer.
All right. So my name is C Dreams. That is a pseudonym. I don't give out my real name at this time. I am a transsexual woman who is an activist, who is a journalist, does a little bit of part-time paralegal and policy consultation with several organizations. But I'm also educated as a theologian and religious historian. I study the intersection of religion with crime, punishment, and rehabilitation, and I'm currently pursuing my doctorate. My background is pretty standard for a lot of people that are, the new euphemism is justice impacted, which I always find kind of laughable, but people impacted by incarceration. And I grew up in foster care and never really had a stable family unit. Had a lot of terrible things happen around me and to me as a child, and got involved in sex work at a really young age, moved away from my home state to Georgia. Within a few years, I was convicted at age 19. I was charged at 21. I was convicted and sent to prison. And I spent a few years, several years, about a decade in prison. And I fought for policy changes and to create safer environments for LGBT prisoners and to hold prison officials accountable. I had the opportunity of having 2 of my own podcasts while I was incarcerated. And I also began to write, and I pursued my bachelor's and my master's degree while incarcerated. And so pretty much what I do is I write full-time for Filter Magazine while I freelance for some other publications. And I primarily write covering surveillance, policing, incarceration, criminalization, and rehabilitation. And I do a little side work as a policy consultant. So that's me in a nutshell.
A lot of accomplishments. And by the way, congratulations on your school.
Oh, thank you so much.
Congratulations on the podcast that you have. Congratulations on your hard work. And I say changing your life, because you could have taken that time in prison and made it very negative for yourself,
Yeah.
but you did a lot of positive things, a lot of
Thank
positive,
you.
and that speaks volumes, right? Because we all make mistakes, just some of us get caught. Some of us
Absolutely.
made a mistake at one point or another in our life.
Absolutely.
Now,
I'm
I'd
fond
like to
of
ask you.
saying,
Go ahead.
oh, no, I'm sorry. I was going to say, I'm fond of saying that prison does one of two things, depending on the person. It either creates a less favorable, worse version of yourself, or it acts as a refining process. It gives you direction and purpose, and it helps you begin to see the world in a different paradigm. And a lot of people, these are the people that come in and they cultivate their talents or their skill set or their knowledge set to become better artists or speakers or whatever, unfortunately in the carceral environment, there's kind of this whole ideology around, well, I'm stuck here, it's terrible, and life will never be good until I'm out. And so people end up deferring all of their hopes, all their dreams, all of their goals, instead of realizing that goals are like Legos. You have to build them with little piece by little piece. And unfortunately, the time in prison is real time. You'll never get it back. So you need to maximize it. You need to use it however you can.
I really like your way of looking at it, and I believe that that's true. As I told you, off air, a lot of times I do go visit uh, people who I'm helping with their cases, right?
Yeah.
And I have to go visit because of these very things. Like, is it that you're a worst monster? And a lot of times, they're very soft spoken, very, So I just think the system also breaks them down. I
True.
agree with you that there's some that they just don't care. Like, they're like, forget it, I don't care. It's the system, and this is what it did to me, and this is where I'm at. Or you use it for positive. You use it for positive. So my next question to you is, how? Well, before we talk about that, what did you accomplish that to you while you were incarcerated was like, wow, I would have never thought I got this or I did this?
Hands down, I would say kind of my introduction to spaces around restorative justice and criminal justice reform. The idea that I was able to begin to build a name and a voice in those spaces and contribute meaningfully to dialogues around really critical issues of our time, issues that reflect our identity as a people and the culture that we propagate. That to me was really mind shattering for me. Like, I think a lot of times in my experience, I can speak only for myself. I think a lot of times most human beings, we have this voice inside of us that the story that we tell ourselves is that, we're not able to change the situation, and therefore we feel like our power is very limited. But I learned honestly that location, realtors always say location, location, location. But when it comes to speaking truth to power, when it comes to creating systemic change or just trying to create a space of advocacy, it doesn't matter where you are. You can begin to do it from behind prison walls or from wherever you are that you're in the midst of being impacted. And so that for me was definitely probably the most amazing accomplishment. And then a close second would of course be, before I came to prison, I had no college education. I graduated from high school and I was always fairly well read, but to be able to earn my master's degree and be in a situation where now I'm pursuing a doctorate, that to me is still, I sometimes have like imposter syndrome. I can't believe the opportunities that were provided to me.
So I know prison's not a good place, right?
No.
But do you think that in your case it did good for you through maybe bad things you went through in there? We'll go into detail if you're willing to talk about that.
Sure.
While you were incarcerated, do you think, that it was to a certain extent a good thing or no?
Yeah. So I want to state that I'm a prison reformer. I'm an advocate for prison conditions. I'm not a prison abolitionist just because I cannot conceptualize an alternative for prison. So I understand some people have an issue when you tell a story or a narrative that's along the lines of like, hey, I benefited from prison. But the reality is in my situation is that the person who I was prior to my imprisonment, I didn't really have a sense of purpose. I was very adrift and I had very little sense of accountability. Prison for me was, and it was it's to no credit to the prison system. Let's not confuse this as being an accolade of the correctional enterprise. This was my own effort at self-rehabilitation. But I think that if I had not been introduced to the environment and the culture and the sheer deprivation that prison unfortunately constitutes, then I wouldn't have had the kind of the necessary catalyst to have the momentum to want to change and to want to better my lot. And that really comes from, hope comes from deprivation. The idea that things can be better and that you want them to be better comes because things are just so sucky in that moment. And so for me personally, prison was a good thing because who I was and where I was headed, completely different path. Although I think that there are major issues with prison that we should be focused on making them more humane and actually more rehabilitative, because the reality is, I think that more incarcerated people would have stories that resembled mine or even surpassed mine if we had environments that were truly redemptive, restorative environments. Whereas, unfortunately, presently, the environments that we have, the carceral settings, are just simply the warehousing of human beings and kind of the complete overlooking of both humanity and potential that exists in those carceral environments.
Well, you said a lot. Okay, so we'll begin here. And I do agree with you with what you said about prisons and abolishment and all of that good stuff. I do agree with a lot of what you said. But I also wonder, with them being, you're saying, so inhumane, right?
Mm-hmm.
What was that for you? And if any, were you able to take any action at all?
Yes. So when I say inhumane, prisons in this country, they are a slew of both human rights violations and constitutional violations. And I hate when I hear people, particularly conservatives, say, well, our countries are better than such and such. It should never be an issue about relativity, about something being better than something else, because the conditions of our prisons, they speak a lot about our identity and our culture as Americans. And prisons tend to be understaffed. Prison guards tend to be poorly trained. They have little incentive to actually manage the prison through sound penological methods. There tends to be a lot of organized gang violence in prisons. Sexual assaults have drastically increased in the past 5 years, especially during and post COVID pandemic heights. Suicide rates have gone up. These are all both constitutional and human rights violations that create inhumane conditions. But the abject failure of the system to provide meaningful programming, to provide access to post-secondary education and vocational training, all of these things that curtail recidivism and help people to reenter society and reintegrate. So the system all in all is a major failing. But the biggest issues for those who are living in the moment inside of America's prisons is their safety and their medical care, their access to safe, violent-free environments and constitutionally commensurate medical care. And unfortunately, they're not getting that. I did file a lawsuit back in 2013 that was settled and became a bright line ruling. It was actually cited by the ACLU in their handbook, and it was used in numerous scholarship, like legal scholarship text and in briefs filed before courts. And I have done different things like organizing protests in the past and sit downs and doing letter writing campaigns and all different types of things, because oftentimes we can't force change. We can only force transparency. And that is a big thing that I stand by. Even if you can't make the system change, you can at least expose it for people to see it for what it really is.
So congratulations on that accomplishment. That's pretty huge. That's pretty huge.
Thank you.
How many people can say they did this because I did this? You know what I'm saying? So congratulations on that, and continue pushing forward. Always be positive. So you talk about prison conditions and more rapes going on now than ever. Why do you think that is?
I think the underlying thing is understaffing. See, the understaffing crisis of the American prison industrial complex across this country, it's an unsung epidemic of its own. It's not getting much coverage, and a lot of people don't realize how significant it is. Understaffing has created significant vacuums in the carceral settings where literally, kind of like the movie Life with Martin Lawrence, that old movie where you kind of see another prisoner walking around with a shotgun, acting almost as a correctional officer to the other prisoners. Well, that vision, that depiction is not so far away from what's actually occurring currently in many of America's prisons, where there is not enough staff. So a lot of the jobs are having to be done by inmates. Well, when it comes to making sure other people are not being sexually assaulted or physically assaulted or having their things taken, prisoners just don't have the same vested interest because of the likelihood for violence. So in the absence of, well-trained security personnel, when you have an environment that is so severe in deprivation, but also there's a great amount of predatory, predation happening inside of institutions, then that's when we're going to see drastic increases in sexual assault and things like that. But to be clear, sexual assault and physical assault, specifically against LGBT prisoners, gay, lesbian, and transsexual prisoners, that's been a thing. The United States Department of Justice has 2 current ongoing investigations into the Georgia Department of Corrections, and the first one began back in 2014. So really what we see now is we just see kind of an increased continuation of the same issues that began popping up about 10 years ago and really reaching a high point 5 years ago.
So do you know exactly what they're being investigated for, or you have no idea?
Oh, yes, I absolutely do. I'm actually in contact with several people who are a part of the investigative team with the DOJ. But so the first investigation is related specifically to instances of PREA violations. PREA is, of course, the Prison Rape Elimination Act. And it's a particular investigation into the safety of LGBT prisoners vis-a-vis like sexual assault and physical assault. The second investigation, which was just launched roughly a year ago, is looking into the increased episodes of violence, specifically murder and suicide, that is occurring inside of the prison system. And they're also kind of tangentially looking into conditions of confinement, because a lot of prisoners and family members of prisoners' loved ones are reporting things like prisoners not being fed, or when they are fed, the food is so inadequate as to not constitute, legitimate nutrition. Also, there have been reports of like standing fecal water and pipes and sewage that does not work, and staff abuse and all types of stuff. So there's kind of a multi subject investigation going on by the Department of Justice at this time.
That's wonderful, because I do know that for a fact that sometimes I'll have people whose cases we hold will turn around and, at times they'll reach out or have a family member reach out, and we'll be told there's only one working stall for 400 men to take a shower. And I'm like, how?
Yeah. It's really ridiculous. It's something else that needs to be looked into that I get the most reports about is about how they are actively cultivating an environment that is meant to discourage or make prisoners feel like they cannot seek out medical care. They're using what are called psychops, psychological warfare tactics, by coming to the medical facility areas very uncomfortable. You get yelled at, you get threatened, you get abused, and that makes you not want to seek out medical. So they have all these little things they do that are just kind of blatant violations of just human decency and of humanity. I also see all of these pictures and videos circulating online. Prisoners are releasing them by the hundreds of people sleeping next to toilets because there's no bed space for them, or sleeping outside, literally outside, like on yards and sally ports. So the prison systems are just a mess right now.
I agree with you 1,000%. The whole system is a joke, but yeah.
Yeah.
Now, while you were in there, you speak of your entire community, right?
I'm sorry, say one more time.
You speak of your entire community, like gay, lesbian, transgender. What am I missing? I think I'm missing one. But,
don't worry about it. It's gotten too out of hand. It's too many letters even for me. I'm sick of it.
Yeah, so, and I hope no one gets offended, because sometimes they'll tell me, that. It was not done on purpose. I'm actually just trying to focus as I'm asking, because what do you think that it is that's so hard within your community while you're in prison?
That's really simple. I know it's going to sound super familiar to people who are not incarcerated, this phrase, but it's so true. Toxic masculinity. Prison is so encapsulated. It's so, to use a COVID term, quarantined from society at large, that even though it's a microcosm, it's a small reflection of the outside world, it's outdated. And so there are a lot of outdated concepts and ideologies and attitudes and mores that exist inside of prison. And there's a very old-fashioned concept of manhood that predominantly existed in Black communities during the area of the 40s to the 80s, with older ideas of what constitutes manhood. And so in an environment that is looked at as a warrior's environment, an environment that you have to survive in, and you have to fight, and you have to demand respect, people who are sexually ambiguous, or who are queer, or they are gender-wise ambiguous, trans people, like, you've seen my pictures. I look like a woman, so I should not have been in a men's prison, but I was. But the reality is, individuals are having their mindset, their belief, the worldview that they, because you have to understand, the old heads have been in prison for a long time. And so the culture that they came in with is the culture that still prevails. And then, of course, there's the gang mentality. And all of these factors come together to shape a type of masculinity that is very toxic, and that looks at, they call LGBT people sissies in prison, and it looks at sissies or LGBT people, queer people, as being less than, because their whole idea is you're supposed to be a man, and you're not supposed to just be any type of man. You're supposed to be this type of man that resonates with me and resonates with my concepts of manhood and masculinity. And if you're not these things, then you are less than human. And while it may not be verbalized in such succinct, direct words, that is the prevailing sentiment.
Yeah, you are so thorough. Like, I just absolutely love it. You are so thorough.
Thank you.
Any of these laws that you've helped put in the book or helped with changing, can you give us a little quick rundown of things that you have done to help with these changes?
Yeah, so I made it possible for trans women, trans prisoners to access bras and undergarments that match their identity. I made it possible for trans women to get laser facial hair removal. I made it possible for trans women to get hormone replacement therapy. I made it possible for trans women to grow their hair out. I made it possible for trans women to order from the female state property packages to get undergarments and skincare and the stuff that they usually reserve for female prisoners. I also made it possible for transgender prisoners to have safety units where they're able to elect to be secluded from the rest of the general population. But I also made it so that they cannot, so that administration cannot segregate trans women away from the population against their will. I also made it possible for something that we used to call, what is it called? Trans psychotherapy support group, which was kind of a support group for trans people that are existing in this environment, how to cope with it and how to, reconcile living in an environment that kind of compels detransition. And lastly, I also made it back in 2015. All the prison correctional staff were mandated to do sensitivity training. They had to do I think it was 10 hours of sensitivity training to get familiarized with concepts around sexuality and gender identity, to kind of just give them a little bit more capacity to sympathize, or at least to relate to the humanity and somebody who they see as so different from themselves.
Okay, that makes sense. What are you working on right now?
So I'm continuing to work with prisoners that I either have gotten in contact with through the organizations that I associate with or who have reached out to me directly. I'm interested in amplifying stories about just abysmal prison conditions. We place people in prison as punishment. When you get a sentence of 5 years, 10 years, whatever your sentence is, you're not sentenced to death by an angry prisoner who doesn't like you, or to be beat or raped. And so I try to hold prison officials responsible by amplifying these stories of prisoners and by reporting and exposing inhumane prison conditions. I'm also working with several prisoners, 2 transgender prisoners. One is Ashley Parker. The other one is Christina Lynch. And I am working with a few guys that have life sentences, trying to draft up programs that we're going to submit to senators to try to do something like a halfway house program that is specifically for lifers that we think are ready for another chance. In other words, we're trying to look at how we can get the law changed. And then I try to go on podcasts like yours and talk with people and use my voice to try to just get them aware about issues that are occurring in the criminal justice system and in the prison system. So, I talk about different angles. I talk about harm reduction, which is drug policy, and I talk about rehabilitation and community-centered justice and all these things, because what we have to ultimately do to change the landscape of our prisons is we have to change the landscape of our criminal justice system. And in order to do that, we have to change the foundations of our culture, which means that we have to start cultivating a culture that is about crime deterrence and about getting people involved with their communities. Because when people are thinking about more than just themselves, they're thinking about the community, then they're less likely to do crime. And so I'm trying to find different organizations that I'm able to match my passion with their vision and just try to promote that work that they're doing. And yeah, that's about it. Anna? Anna? So, something else I think that is really important is lifers. Lifers, unfortunately, there just isn't a lot of sympathy for life sentence having prisoners. And I think that's because kind of the rhetoric, the political and social rhetoric around life sentences, life with and without parole, is unfortunately a lot of these prisoners do have more, I guess, violent or just less socially palatable charges. But the reality is people change, and we've legislated and put into place a system that is very unforgiving, and that it's not truly about redemption and rehabilitation, which is why to me it's always a joke to hear the word corrections in any type of carceral agency's title, because corrections implies that you are to have some type of restorative process and that you would be allowed to move forward with a life that is corrected. And I feel like what we now have an ever-growing rate of life sentences. They're being handed out with more, with greater frequency than ever before, and there isn't anything in place to really try to get that conversation going. There are some organizations that are looking at it and working on it, but it's not quite reached the crescendo of noise that we need to actually spark a change. One of the things that I find most disheartening about the system when it comes to life sentences that are eligible for parole is that they frequently get these messages from the parole boards that say something along the lines of, due to the nature of your charge at this time, the board says that, or the board finds that you are not ready to be released to society, something to that effect. And I think that's kind of ridiculous, because the nature of the conviction will never change, but the nature of that person's heart can change. And I find that a lot of people, after they've spent that much time in prison, which, by the way, side point, kind of begs the question, how much time is enough time before we're willing as a society to believe that people have changed? And I know firsthand from both my time in prison and the time, the connections that I have maintained or facilitated post prison, that people do change. The sheer amount of just readiness for a second chance at life that's in prisons. Prison is full of so much hope, and it's crazy because there's so much to be hopeless about there, but it's full of so much hope. You have so many people that are just dreaming about and dreaming for, hoping for a second chance. And so that's something I'm very passionate about right now. And there's an organization on Facebook that is pending nonprofit status, and they're called Life After Life. And they're trying to educate the public, and they're trying to reach academicians and policymakers and things like that to really begin to create a shift in our culture where we are more forgiving and we're more willing to actually see prisoners and those specifically with life sentences rehabilitated.
I hope you can hear me now.
I can,
because
yes.
I think I mentioned to you, most of my cases from the state of Georgia are lifers.
Yeah, it's
Um,
tragic.
what you said is so true, and I want the listening audience to understand something. When someone has not received a DR is a disciplinary report, and you ask them to behave, you've asked them to take all these classes. Prison's supposed to be a rehabilitation center. They go up for parole, and the response is either what she just mentioned, or you haven't done enough time. Just that's it. You haven't, no reason, no nothing. You haven't done enough time.
Which to me is
What the
absurd,
hell?
because if you've done 25 years and they don't think that that 25 years has caused you to change as a person, to be full of remorse, then they are essentially saying that no amount of time is enough. Because if after a quarter of a century you don't think that I've changed, then you don't believe
Mm-hmm.
that I can change. That's all it is.
Um, See, I have some clients that have been in there for 27 years, 30 years. I think the one that I've had the most is 35 years.
Yeah.
35 years.
The guy that I advocate on behalf has done 28 years, and it breaks my heart.
So I want you to know that on my behalf, right,
Hmm.
and my organization, you can count on my support for whoever, because this was one of the things that we're starting to do and we're starting to structure for next year. And it's kind of funny, we're doing the same thing but different organizations.
That is,
Going to reach out to a lot of people within office. When I say office, I mean high up there, senators,
yeah,
representatives, whoever we got to speak with,
absolutely.
because something has to change. Obviously, and I hate to say this, but it's the truth. The Georgia Parole Board is a joke. It's a joke because it seemed like no one got a response for anything. What was that? May, June, July. All of a sudden, July, August, and September, a whole bunch of denials. And I'm like, what is this? And then, sometimes they'll have a parole meeting, other times they don't. It's just insane to me. But anything else you'd like to add to that?
No, I would just love to say that I think that what you and your organization are doing is amazing. And it's not only is it amazing, it is so critical. It is so critical because the type of changes that we're trying to make are not individualistic changes, they are systemic changes. And, you know, when the work that you're doing is pivotal, because most of us are not going to see the complete, yield of our efforts. But what we're doing is we're adding our little bits to a collective piece with both the activists and the voices that came before us, and the activists and the voices that will come after us. And so, what you're doing is it's truly pivotal. And I would love to collaborate with you and with your organization in whatever capacity I'm able to. Um, I thank God for you, and I thank God for your organization, and for the other people who are doing this work and are in this space and are really just about creating the necessary change and holding officials accountable for their failures. So, um, Anna,
I truly, and I'm sorry, I keep losing signal, so I apologize for that. I
no
truly
problem.
appreciate that, and those beautiful words. And yes, same here. Just know that anything that's needed, because I'm not one of these activists, and you strike me like you're the same way, that you'll see me and then you don't see me again.
Hmm.
I actually follow each case file for 5 years to make sure that they have everything on point so they don't go back, because we want to make sure that they continue to be rehabilitated continue rehabilitating, right, while they're
Mm-hmm.
out. Let me ask you a question. You mentioned mental health. I am a huge
Yes.
advocate for mental health because I believe that a huge percentage of people who are incarcerated have some type of something going on mentally, right?
Yeah, it's like
One,
63% of GDC's population.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I read a report a few months ago that said it was like 63% of GDC's population is mental health caseload.
Wow, wow, that's a huge amount.
That is a huge amount.
Yeah, yeah. Um, and see, that's why I genuinely believe the system is a joke because why not put them in a transitional center and give them that rehabilitation instead of continuing to make these prisons that really are understaffed. We all know all the stuff that goes on there because one thing about it is so many times we heard, and I'm sure you can give some background on this too. Oh, contraband this, contraband that. But when there was a
Yeah.
pandemic, there wasn't loved ones going to prison. There wasn't attorneys going to prison. There wasn't anybody going to prison but the people that worked there. And the inmates sure weren't bringing it in. So, it's just to me, right? It's a joke. It's just a joke. I'm like, you give them DRs, but you're the one bringing it in. And there's no exception to that because there was a pandemic. No one was out. There was no movement. So, but what is your take on the mental health? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Okay, now I can.
Oh,
Now
okay.
I
I'm
can.
sorry.
What is your take on the mental health part of it?
Yes. So I just wanted to clarify. I pulled up the statistical report for 2020. 2020 statistical report said it was 20% of GDC prisoners are mental health. But I read somewhere else, I think on a website called like Reform Georgia, that it was like as high as 60%. So I'm not sure which of those two numbers is correct, the GDC number or this organization's number. But either way, 20%, 63%, 20% is a drastic number. So I would say that I think it's more than 20% because of the amount of time I did in prison. I think that some of the biggest issues around mental health that I worry about, and I think that we saw it directly because of the rise in suicide, is with understaffing and with less mental health and less security. More mental health prisoners were struggling with their diagnoses, whether that be depression or schizophrenia, in a very unsupervised, very just distressing environment. And I worry because I've always said that there should be some type of transitional care, mental health resources available for prisoners who are being released. But I think that really that's kind of an almost comical expectation for us to have, because if we just simply look at the prisoners who have severe mental health crises, have severe mental health issues that are currently inside of our prison system, we can already see that the apparatus in place, the GDC, et cetera, they're not able to provide meaningful care as it is to the people that are in here. So I feel like we should be doing more. I feel like we should be doing so much more, but I'm not sure that I have the solution either, because it all comes down to ultimately to money. It comes down to money and it comes down to people. They say they don't have enough money, and we know for a fact they don't have enough people. Either way, the system, the criminal justice system, the prison system, it was created for two purposes: to serve society and to serve the individuals by, you know, custody, care and custody. And part of the custody is the care. That's mental health, that's rehabilitation, that's physical health care, all of that. And so the system is failing society, and it's failing those who are placed in its custody, and it's failing those who it's releasing from its custody. And mental health is by far one of the three biggest arenas that it's failing in.
I totally agree with you. And to be honest with you, both of those numbers are pretty high, right? But
Yeah,
I
either way.
believe that it is, in my opinion, right, closer to the 63%. And I'm going to tell you why. When I speak to potential people we're going to advocate for, their families and stuff, and you start
Yeah.
looking at the background, they're all pretty much the same story. If there
Eh,
wasn't sexual abuse as children, there was drugs, there was this, there was that, and it's just certain things, different things that I think traumatize a lot of them. Um, so I believe, in my opinion, right? It's only my opinion, um, that the bigger number seems to me to be more accurate. I mean, I don't know. Like I said, you dealt with the system, but I've heard some crazy things. Like, how are they even allowed in the same area as everyone else?
Yeah, no,
Period.
I totally agree. I totally agree. I think the bigger number, while it may not be exactly 63% on the head, I think that a bigger number is more likely because during my nearly decade in the prison system or whatever, I saw it. But also you have to account for the people who have mental health needs, but they maybe have not been identified because they haven't put themselves forward or because the screening process didn't catch them. But moving on, let's look at the prison conditions. The prison conditions, the sheer amount of violence, deprivation, extortion, physical abuse, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, all of these things, the being disenfranchised from your family and from your community, et cetera. This creates mental health, axes, or should I say like comorbidities, if nothing else. So even if you came into prison perfectly mentally healthy, it's an unreasonable expectation that you would leave prison perfectly mentally healthy because prisoner post-traumatic stress disorder is a real documented phenomena.
I I agree. I agree. Um, I agree. Very unfortunate. And see, I think that if more of our community, right, got involved and actually spoke to people, and I want to make one thing clear to the listening audience. I know a lot of people out there feel you did the crime, you do the time. Okay, and that's fine. It's everybody's opinion is respected, right? However, should you really be in a prison that's full of rats or mold or roaches or they don't even the non-working showers, non-working toilets in the rooms? I've heard and seen all of this at one point or another. Is
You
it
know,
really okay? Huh? Go ahead.
no, I was going to chime in. I agree with you. I think that the whole phrase "do the time, do the crime" is really just a cry by society for people to be accountable, and that's totally like that resonates with me. I get that. Be accountable. I did my time. I served my time. I was accountable, and in a lot of ways, because I had to register as a sex offender, I will be continuing that accountability for some time to come. But the reality is that we hand out prison sentences as punishment because of a breach of the social contract between the offender and the state or the offender and the victim. Okay. Our prisons are supposed to be rehabilitative environments. It goes beyond vermin infestation, rats, roaches, etc. It goes beyond poor plumage and sewage. It goes beyond asbestos. It goes beyond black mold. It goes beyond standing water and fecal matter. It goes beyond poor structure, poor foundational structures and crumbling buildings. What does it say about us as a culture if when we punish people, and our rhetoric is that we're sending them to prison to be corrected, to be rehabilitated, and then to rejoin society? What does it say about us if we send them to prisons where this person has a 5-year sentence and they get killed a year before they're supposed to go home over a 48-cent ramen noodle soup? it's not just about the conditions themselves. It's about the things that are occurring in that condition. When you say, do the crime, do the time, that's fine. But what time are we asking from our prisoners? Are we asking for time that is rehabilitative? Are we asking for time in an environment that is warlike and creates less favorable versions of people? Because you have this person who went to prison on a drug charge or a shoplifting charge, and now they had to kill somebody for their life, or they got killed. Okay? That's all I'm saying. You can demand accountability, but also demand accountability from prison officials. Make sure the environments that we incarcerate in are humane environments that are safe and which promote the development of people, so that if and when they are released, they don't become greater threats to society. Because the reality is many studies have been done that have shown that when you take this person who's a non-violent offender and you drop them in prison where they are at risk for sexual assault, for gang violence, for being extorted, for being beat, for being killed, okay? We all are animals to an extent. We all have to do what we have to do to survive. And if you put me in a corner, I'm either going to fight or I'm going to flight. And if I can't run away, I'm going to fight. And a lot of people find themselves in prison either being preyed upon or having to do things that they will forever suffer from mentally in order to protect themselves. So I just want people to realize it goes beyond rats and roaches. It goes beyond being starved, which many prisoners are. The food is abysmal. It's all high carbs and it's little portions that are not fit for grown individuals. It goes down to, why are we incarcerating people in environments where they have to fight for their life? That is not okay.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought that point up, because that's something that I always say. What is a person to do, right? Because we can speak for men and women, children as well, because some of them go to juvenile. But what is the point that we have and open up our hearts and say, well, that's too much? Because I think it does, if it does affect the general population out there, they don't really care. You don't hear these stories, so you don't really care. You just, throw away the key. And I've heard people say this, and, we've had our arguments, because I have a heart, and I believe people change. And it's not to say that everybody who's in prison changes, but if a person has done everything they need to do, I have a client right now, finished everything, has done everything that needs to be done, but you still can't even send them into a transitional center for a lifer. Why?
Yeah, and
there's only a limited amount of space. It's unacceptable.
And to the people that have the mindset that's like, lock them up and throw away the key, I would say this. Remember that no door stays locked and closed forever. It may stay locked and closed on this one person or these two people, but what about the 3, 4, or 5 that get out? Because no door stays locked and closed forever. When we talk about throwing away the key and locking it up, that's saying that let it be a problem over there that doesn't affect me. But the reality is that no single person can move forward in life without carrying some of the baggage, some of the things that they have seen, that they have survived with them. And when we put people in environments like prison that are guerrilla environments where they have to withstand or even do terrible things in order to survive, all right, we're working with the assumption when we say lock the door and forget about them, throw it away, the key, we're working with the assumption that these people will never be reintroduced into society. When we fail as a culture and as a nation and as a people to create safe prison environments that are rehabilitative, we only store up for ourselves problems that will later on filter back into our communities. Because now we have these people who for 5, 10, 15, 20 years have had to be warriors, and we expect them to come out into the public and act with civility. That's absurd. Okay. And then some people will say, well, we'll just reincarcerate them. Well, that doesn't work. If that worked, we wouldn't be in the issues that we're in now. We're one of the greatest incarcerators in the world. We incarcerate 25% of the world's population, and we're still failing as a society. So lock them up and throw away the key as an ideology, as a methodology for corrections is not working. Instead, we need to get our communities invested in the carceral process so that corrections and rehabilitation is community centered so that it's real restorative justice. Otherwise, all we're doing is we're just pickle jarring some issues for the future.
So, in your opinion, and you made some very valid points, and it's insane because it's almost like you're in my brain and you're just picking it and you're just saying everything that I normally would say over and over again, and these are my arguments. You know, a lot of times, even politicians, they don't want to talk about prison reform or anything like that during election time. Why? Well, because the general public doesn't really care for that. Because this is a stigma you guys have given. Because I don't think that anybody in the general population is going to be okay with a person constantly scared of being raped. Let's say it how it is, and then they kill the person who was constantly maybe raping them, even.
Yeah.
You see, and then they have to do more time. They catch a charge. Blah 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 blah. So forth, so on. So you see,
It's
for
tragic.
me, yes, yes. And I'm like, I have a heart. I personally cannot just sit there and just turn my face. Like, I don't hear these stories. I can't do
Yeah.
that. I have to help, especially lifers. What is the problem with giving a lifer a place to transition back into society? Because they're, I can never say the word right.
Recidivism?
Yes, is very, very low.
True.
Probably lower than the person who got caught doing petty theft, to be honest with you guys.
Yeah, no, drug consumption and larceny slash theft related charges have the highest recidivism rates, whereas murder and sex offenses have the lowest recidivation rates.
Mm-hmm. And see, and the reason why they don't. You think anybody after sitting in prison, you have somebody you advocate for, 28 years. Do you think that they really want to go back?
No, I honestly feel like the gentleman who I advocate on behalf of, who's done 28 years, he's one of the founders for this organization I was telling you about called Life After Life. His family, outside his family, his cousin and his aunt help him run this program or whatever, and he writes them somehow. But so I think that society is missing out on his voice. I think that society is missing out on the contributions he can make to crime deterrence. I think that academics and policymakers and law enforcement are missing out on his insights. And I think that he could curate an understanding that is more comprehensive and is actually more effective, more impactful in deterring crime and lowering recidivism, because the gentleman is not only very brilliant, he's very insightful, but he's proven it. He has the numbers. He's a story of lived experience, and it's again, I had to use the word again. It's just tragic. It's so sad because you know this, I know this. Some of the most creative, intelligent, and capable people, some of the kindest people I know, are incarcerated.
Absolutely. I tell people all the time. I have friends in all kinds of places. All kinds of places. I have had some of the most help that I've had with my businesses has came from people who are incarcerated. Believe it or not, they've helped me formulate the plans, so forth, so on. And this is why, they were somebody when they were out on the street. Not everyone was a constant criminal.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to ask you, in the state of Georgia, there is a law that if you're charged with one of what they call the seven sins, You can be charged as an adult at the age of 13.
Yes.
How do you feel about that law?
Um, I feel like it's a failing of our society. I feel like I understand the desire, the impulse to want to deal with younger children, minors who are 12 and 13 and 14 years old who commit extremely violent crimes. I understand the impulse or the desire to deal with them as adults. I get it because I think that as human beings, we all understand the desire or impulse to punish somebody. But I want to be clear that the laws that allow us to punish juveniles as adults for, and we see it not only in violent offenses, we see it in sexual offenses too. The laws allow us to punish juveniles as adults, to me, are about punishment. They're not about rehabilitation. And I think that when it comes to juvenile offenders, it's so much more important to center rehabilitation because if you make criminalization and punishment purely the end all be all of your intentions regarding juvenile offenders, then what you've done is you have essentially just manufactured not only an individual lifelong criminal from a very young age, you're now beginning to set precedents for an entire generation. And I feel like the youth is so much more malleable and so much more reformable than anybody is. We know this when it comes to education and when it comes to learning patterns and behavioral modules. We know from studying the brain that the younger you are, the more adaptable you are. So I feel like laws that focus on the penalization and treating juveniles as adults, I feel like the focus is too much on vengeance, it's too much on punishment, and not about restoration. So I find it a human rights violation of the grossest level, the grossest order. But I do understand that there are some juveniles who the crime seems so unconscionable for the average people, especially those in power, that it just it staggers them and frightens them so much, distresses them so much that they lash out with these high-handed, heavy-handed punitive measures.
Um, there is it, now I want to ask you, are there any final thoughts? And before I say that, see, you have to come back to my
Oh,
platform.
I would love to. That'd be wonderful.
This interview was so good, and guys, we did not we did not have questions planned. We did not. I told her, I said, no, let's just go with it. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
and so we did. And I'm going to tell you something. I want to come back because I want to actually start drilling certain certain things that do happen within the prison that you can give insight on.
Okay,
Because
yeah.
the ones I advocate for, so many of them, I wish I could bring them on the platform, right? But I
Yeah.
can't for the obvious reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. It's too
So
much risk. It's too much risk.
yeah,
The GDC does not want to be exposed. So,
absolutely, absolutely. So um, I would like for you to give final thoughts, and I'm telling you, hopefully I can have you here. I don't care if we do this once a month and do a special lunchtime with Anna, just to talk about these things, you know?
yeah, I would love that. That would be amazing. I would love to come back in. It's been truly fabulous.
Okay, so we'll plan it out, and yeah, you guys, I might just start doing this on, the weekends, maybe a Saturday, Sunday. C and I will figure it out on our schedule availability, right?
Yeah.
And we'll let you guys know because I really think this. She said so many important things, and I really think that this needs to be out there as much as possible. So I appreciate you accepting, right, to come back.
Of
And
course. Yeah.
um, so finally, any final thoughts?
Um, yes. Uh, I think that it's important that we remember the systems in place were designed in a different time. And while initially the systems in place for corrections were intended by the Quakers to be rehabilitative and redemptive, the systems, the criminal justice system and the penal system, they have lost their way and they become about punishment. And whenever we center punishment, AKA revenge, in our identity, we've fallen from who we're supposed to be. I encourage people to remember that the story of humankind has been a story of progress, whether it be in science, whether it be in finance, whether it be in governmental institutions. So it only makes sense that even when it comes to dealing with crime and when it comes to dealing with rehabilitation, that we see it as a story of progress too. And progress has its inherent failings, but we must be patient and we must endeavor forward. And that means that we have to begin to allow ourselves and encourage others around us to see the potential and the goodness that exists in even people that we don't see eye to eye with them, or they're behind bars or whatever. And we need to remember that people are the product of their experiences. Nobody just woke up and did or made the choices they made, like, fuck it, I'm gonna go to prison. No, that's not how it happened. And we have to really begin to center the redemption of people. We have to really begin to remember that people are fundamentally good. I'm not saying that there aren't some individuals in this world who are just really like jacked up and screwed up, because that is true. But the majority of people are fundamentally good. And when given the chance, given the vehicle, the means, and the mode to become better, they will become better. And so we need to stop focusing so much on punishment and vengeance and start focusing more on redemption and restoration, which is incidentally also the story of Christianity. So
That was beautifully said.
well, thank you.
And I'd also like to speak about that next time you come out, if you come back to the platform, about
Yeah.
how just following anything. And when I say anything, whatever your religious beliefs are, in this platform, there's no judgment, right?
I'm personally a Christian, but I study religion in a larger scale. So I study Islam, I study Judaism, I study a bunch of different things, because what I particularly focus on is how religion, the impact of religion on crime, punishment, and rehabilitation. So while I'm personally a Christian, I try to do my work on the macrocosm level of religion at large. So, yeah.
So, and I'd like to talk about that next. One of the things we'll talk about, but just keep that in mind.
Absolutely.
You have been freaking awesome. A huge
Thank.
And I look forward to us getting together and helping many people out there, because it's
Yeah.
laws. Not every single thing do that. Some of these laws, things will then change. One of the things I do know is in the state of Georgia, with the 7 deadly sins or 7 sins, it's really tough law. It's probably one of the toughest, and and then you also got their 3-strike law. There is a 3-strike law in the state of Georgia. I never knew that until I did what I do, and I'm like, this is insane. Just throw away.
Well, it's not a 3.
That's their attitude.
It's the repeat offender law, and it doesn't even actually require 3 strikes. It just requires any type of history of recidivism, and they can hit you with 30 years, life sentence.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's ridiculous.
That's too much, so, but
I know.
Yeah, a huge hug, and thank you so much for coming to my platform, and we'll catch you next time. Bye-bye.
Yes, thank you so much. You take care, and I thank you for having me on.
No problem.